Alright, welcome back to another episode of Revisiting History Book Reviews. I'm excited to present this one because I've been studying this topic for a couple years now, since I started at ASU, and it's really kind of taken my eye for quite a ride. And before starting in this journey, I was pretty much apolitical, didn't really have a political preference, and I was kind of middle center. My dad didn't have a political leaning really. He had a lot of government benefits and such, so because of that, you would think that I was further left, but I try and use logic more than I do my feelings, and because of that, sometimes I come off as callous or not caring, but I don't think that's necessarily the case in all cases. But I digress. Today we are talking about Executing the Rosenbergs by Clune, an Oxford University Press text, and one that I really did enjoy quite a bit. This book itself was actually suggested by an ASU University professor, which you'd think would have tried to present kind of a counter argument. It does to some degree present a counter argument against the execution of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg to some extent, but it also does create a counter argument. Okay, now this is a hotly debated text, this text particularly, but the subject in general, the Rosenbergs, because of the fact that, for one, they were executed, and for two, early on there was not a ton of evidence suggesting that they were going to be guilty of the crimes they were being committed for, right? I mean, they're being given the death penalty. But this book and other evidence in the contemporary era suggests that the Rosenbergs did, in fact, at least to some extent, create a massive surge in Soviet power throughout the Red Scare era, right? And this is going to be a huge problem because even today, the problems that these people created are still reverberating throughout the world, through world politics and even further. But we're going to get into this book. Like I said, it does provide some context for both directions, and it does provide a pretty good narrative for the case for and against the Rosenbergs. Now it says Martin Sorbel admitted that in 2008 that he and Julius had indeed passed military secrets on to the Soviet Union, right? This is going to be a pretty big deal because the Soviet Union was basically one of our biggest enemies after the end of World War II. Now, within this text, we see a couple things. Like I said, that one is just another anecdotal story of somebody saying, yes, we did in fact pass these secrets on to the Soviet Union. Okay, well, Julius died without saying anything. He went to his grave saying, I didn't do anything. But we see it says right here, 3 different sources provided this information that there was some sort of problem. It says high-level defectors were spies who turned against the Soviets, Venona transcripts, and the KGB files. Okay, so here in the future, I'm going to break into a couple different texts. One is going to be the Venona transcripts. I have the full text, the full collection of them. The CIA and the NSA compiled version, which is a beautiful compilation in itself, as well as it says the people who turned against the Soviets. One is Whittaker Chambers, right? Whittaker Chambers has a pretty interesting story with Alger Hiss, and the story with Alger Hiss, it's absolutely insane. It sounds like something out of a James Bond movie, because they end up going to a farm, and then he pulls Whittaker Chambers pulls some papers out of a pumpkin and some film, and then there's some of it behind a toilet, and then they develop it, and it's supposedly indicting Alger Hiss, and there's a typewriter involved that may or may not have been used by Alger Hiss, and it's a crazy story that's kind of interlooping, and this is really early on. We find out that Alger Hiss is probably working for the Soviets, and then within the Venona papers, we're pretty sure we can identify Alger as well. So that gives kind of a secondary source showing that Alger Hiss was also, should have been indicted in this situation very, very early on, and should have sent up some red flags to what was going on within the United States, right? It says Kim Philby and William Weissman had likely informed the KGB and U.S. officials could read Soviet cables early on. So we actually within the Venona Cables, we only have a couple of years of Venona Cables, right? It's very, very limited because at some point the Venona transcripts start changing, right? They take the one-time pad translation key that they had before, which is the decryption method they used, and then they changed it all of a sudden, probably because Kim Philby and William Weissman had given the KGB, the Soviet intelligence services, the information before we had known. But we knew, had some idea, because whenever we started seeing the transcripts start changing, we couldn't read them. So it says, why did hundreds of Americans spy for the Soviets? This is a pretty important question, because it's like, well, why would anybody spy for anybody? And it says right here, the FBI used the acronym MICE: money, ideology, compromise, or ego, right? So money, you want to be paid for whatever you're doing. Ideology, you believe full on in something like the extreme ideologies of Nazism, or any kind of extremism to the fullest. Compromise, somebody has some sort of blackmail information on you. Back in the 60s, this was common with homosexuals. A lot of time they were compromised, and that information was put out there, or threatened to be put out there, which at that time could ruin somebody's complete reputation. It's not even like close to how it is today. And then ego, so you want to be famous, right? You want to get your name out there. You're going to commit these crimes. You're going to divulge these secrets because you want your name to be known, okay? And these are the reasons that the FBI gave for people going ahead and betraying the United States, essentially, okay? It says, Stephen Usden, one of the most effective industrial espionage operations in history, he said, from 1944 to 1950, they forwarded radio, sonar, military electronics, and jet engine technology that helped the Soviets keep up with the Americans. By early 1945, Julius' spy network included Joel Barr, David Greenglass, Ruth Greenglass, Russell McNutt, William Pearl, Alfred Sarant, Michael Sertovich, Morton Sobel, and Nathan Sussman. Two important names you're going to see there are David Greenglass and Ruth Greenglass, because later on we're going to see those two names basically be the key to indicting the Rosenbergs. It says Ethel Rosenberg was aware of her husband's espionage activities and shared his ideas. That's a text cited in the book, as well as it's directly quoted from the Venona transcripts. The intelligence services believe that she was likely aware, but not an active operative, I believe, or something along those terms. We'll get into the actual Venona transcripts here shortly, because I think they're pretty important to bust open. It says, once executed, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were transformed from accused spies into martyrs, which is definitely true. Even the story today is still debated whether somehow they didn't commit the crimes, which there's no way that it's possible that they could have possibly not committed the crimes with the amount of evidence that supports it. You'll have people that say this doesn't make sense. There's no way that they could have even possibly transferred this evidence, but there's also people who say that the Earth is flat. So let's you have to look at things. But it says, under Truman, we started out in 1940s having issues. Even back to the early 1920s, I would say we had a problem with people getting into the sphere of influence that weren't supposed to be there. So particularly under FDR, we have a massive surge of people who get in because the government opens up at the New Deal policies and it expands massively. So they're hiring tons and tons of people. Because they're hiring those tons and tons of people, basically people are able to infiltrate the government pretty easily. Fascism had just been defeated. The communism had not. Okay, so that's why we see the rise of communism within the government instead of fascism. It says, if someone had labeled critics as fascists and critics criticized capitalism and democracy as decadent, one could assume they were communists. Federal officials took more direct action and charged American Communist Party leaders with inciting revolution under the Smith Act. The evidence officials claimed was not the communists did, but what they read and discussed, in some ways infringing on one's ability to associate with others, although to some degree you have to say, well, under what context is speech protected, under what context is association protected? If you're a terrorist, shouldn't you be arrested? If you're if you're inciting violence, shouldn't you be paying for those problems? But then again, at the same point, there's a line between freedom of speech and crossing the line, right? So the big one that I always hear is yelling fire in a crowded movie theater. People get trampled, right? That's an irresponsible thing to do, therefore you should get charged. Okay, that would be crossing the line, right? Standing on a corner, even yelling, I don't think that's permissible 100% by the Constitution. So, for instance, protesting and yelling, the police can come over and say, "Oh, you're breaking the law because you're being disorderly." Well, I mean, you can look at somebody wrong and be disorderly, right? So that's where they start pushing the line. I mean, even right now, you people are at the park under the coronavirus lockdowns and being arrested for playing soccer with their kids. So it's like, come on, guys! Like it's sad whenever we're in the land of the free and you see these kind of problems. But it says, when a high-level diplomat and accused by Alger Hiss was convicted of perjury in 1950, Americans feared that communists were undermining the strength of the United States from within. So he did perjure himself at one point. The Pumpkin Papers and the testimony of Whittaker Chambers ended up actually taking him down, and he was in the State Department, believe it or not. He had State Department clearances, and he worked there. But the video's online. You can look it up right now. Look it up, Alger Hiss, in Whittaker Chambers. It's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful video. And maybe I'll even put together a documentary on this, because I have a full, complete script for the documentary, because I've read the Venona transcripts. I went through the Venona papers, and like I said, it's pretty interesting. And if you like spy thrillers and you like this kind of information, you like the Bond movies or whatever, this is way better. This is real. This is Julius primarily recruited others. So Julius Rosenberg primarily recruited others to the cause, ultimately managing a spy ring of a dozen engineers. He did occasionally spy himself, however, as when he gave a prototype proximity fuse to Fexlikov as a Christmas present in December 1944. So this is one of the devices that was used to take down our aircraft, right? So a proximity fuse, it gets close to the aircraft and then explodes. So we have this guy giving away aircraft things that are then going to be used by the Soviet Union in Korea, in Vietnam, against American troops, because the Soviet Union were 100% sure were supporting these people. Okay. It says, in addition, his engineer friends, Julius also recruited Army Sergeant David Greenglass, Ethel's younger brother, to spy for the Soviets. So Julius's wife, he recruited his wife's younger brother to spy for him. Now this guy works within the Manhattan Project, okay, and he's actually going to take a lot of this information, pass it on to Julius Rosenberg, and then pass that information on to the Soviet Union. Okay, some of this information includes, I believe, a drawing of the initiator of an atomic bomb. Okay, so this is scary, scary stuff, and we have these guys tossing it around like it's some joke. It says David was tapped to work as a special engineer detachment at Los Alamos in Mexico as a mechanist constructing the precision molds for high explosive lenses for the Manhattan Project. This is the guy, David Greenglass. Now, this guy ends up walking. I think he ends up doing some time, gets a plea deal, and like he said, he flips on Julius later, and Ethel, and gets his wife to do it as well, with deadly consequences. Okay, there's two other people that I think I should mention real briefly because they're not mentioned in the text. One is his name, last name is Hall. I'm gonna have to look up the exact information. This guy is a true number, complete enemy of the state. I mean, goes out and takes information. His wife is quoted in the Venona documentary as saying that that he believed that Stalin had to have this information, and that he was going to go give it to Stalin and the Soviet Union, and that she would say that she would have been, had she been asked, she would say that she was an accomplice. Yeah. And I'm like, man, maybe she should be hauled in and taken out like the Rosenbergs, because she's admitting to this stuff, whereas even the Rosenbergs didn't ever admit to it. So we start to look at this. Oh, and then Klaus Fuchs. Now, Klaus Fuchs was another physicist, and this guy worked with Harry Gold, who was a courier for him. And Klaus Fuchs was also another gentleman who gave secrets about the atomic bomb to the Soviets and never really paid for it, right? Ends up living his life out, I think, in England, having a nice life, while the Rosenbergs end up being executed for doing a much smaller crime. Klaus Fuchs and Theodore Hall ended up committing much worse crimes, providing much more detailed information of the atomic bomb, whereas Julius was at best a mediocre spy and aspiring leader, basically. Good at organizing, not so good at spying, but he was able to get the people he needed into the places he needed them, right? So it says right here that this also, I believe, is located within the Venona papers, and it says that the FBI believed that Ethel may serve as a lever during the case for Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. The thing is that throughout this case, we see that Ethel does not ever tip on Julius, and Julius doesn't ever tip because they threaten Ethel Rosenberg, his wife. So we do know that in Venona that they forwarded radar, electronics, and jet engine technology to the Soviets between 1944 and 1950. Greenglass also was doing the same espionage activities, and that Ethel Rosenberg's conspiracy to commit espionage during wartime, citing the period June 6, 1944 through 1950, under the Espionage Act, that she could be charged because of the wartime. Now, technically, we weren't at war with the Soviets. We were technically allied with them during World War II, but they still believe that under the Espionage Act during wartime, that's still an offense admissible for the death penalty. Okay. Also, it says right here that this was the big kicker, was that the Greenglasses, the in-laws and Julius's sister, said that Ethel was typing these reports for Julius. So if she was typing these reports, she was therefore an accomplice. So say Julius was vocalizing these reports, Ethel would type them, and then therefore she was taking them, transcribing them. She's complicit in the act of his crime. Okay, that's a big one, because throughout this they threaten Julius with that aspect there, and Ethel ends up basically being executed because of this accusation that we don't know if it's true or not. It says that Edgar Hoover called this a distinctive achievement to be enrolled in the annals of our country's history, right? The domestic processes. But this actually stirred up a lot of domestic problems, and even more problems abroad. Okay, so the most prevalent problems that we're going to see are not actually the problems that happen in the United States, but are problems that happen overseas, right? So the actual backlash that we see comes from people like Pope Pius. It says he publicly condemned the scheduled executions. The staunch anti-communist issued a statement explaining that death sentences for young people was so pitiful, and that was not animated by any ignoble partisan interest. He wanted to save their lives. So we see the Pope coming out. We see Albert Einstein coming out 5 days after the Pope's statement, writing to Truman, explaining that his conscience compelled him to seek clemency for the Rosenbergs. I mean, two pretty powerful, intelligent people: the Pope Pius, and then Albert Einstein. I mean, that's if you want people on your side, those are the people who you think can get you out of trouble. Okay. One interesting thing here is it says world opinion is horrified. It's kind of some propaganda of the time. I'll show it real quick, but it talks about how basically the Rosenbergs were tried without any kind of evidence. Now, it says there were major campaigns on behalf of the Rosenbergs. This was launched by the actual Soviet Union itself, as well as people who were pro-Rosenberg people. It says the judge in the Rosenberg case also rejected clemency. So we have the judge rejecting clemency, and then we have also the president coming down to the very last minute saying, I'm not going to support these people. Okay. Even Reverend Billy Graham came out and said that communism was intrinsically wicked and masterminded by Satan himself. Okay, so we have no spilt milk from Billy Graham, and even though he's a very, very holy man and very, very praised even in the contemporary era, did not have any hurt feelings for the Rosenbergs, right? Because these generally were pretty bad people. It says, just as the president weighed clemency for the Rosenbergs, the judge decided that he would not receive a single plea for pardon or postponement, arguing that those who will not confess will hang. Right, so they're not saying that if they did anything, the judge is saying that you will die now because of your crimes. It says the nature of the crime for which they have been found guilty and sentenced far exceeds that of taking a life of another citizen. It involves the deliberate betrayal of the entire nation and could very well result in the death of many thousands of innocent citizens. By their act of these two individuals have in fact betrayed the cause of freedom for which free men are fighting and dying at this very hour in Korea. It says once again these were insufficient justifications to rehear their case because again there was so much evidence behind the scenes flying around, but it wasn't even able to be released. So we have the evidence on the surface that's very, very condemning, but there's also the Venona documents flying around, not being announced by the NSA or the FBI because they don't want anybody to understand what they really do know, because then they're going to have to start rolling it back. Now, it says, before the judge's sentencing, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover had privately expressed concerns about Ethel Rosenberg. Hoover understood that her participation consisted, quote, only in assisting in the activation of Greenglass. So we see the director of the FBI saying himself that the fullest extent of Ethel is the assisting of the recruiting of her brother. That's pretty much it. This is problematic because we see her go down as well for crimes that her husband and her brother committed. Like I said, her brother even went further. Now, beyond the Espionage Act, we have the Atomic Energy Act of 1946, which is another issue that was going to come up for the Rosenbergs because if not for the Espionage Act, they could be tried under other acts that did exist at the time. Now, I believe there was some discrepancies within the punishments of the acts. I believe one was the death penalty, whereas one was like life in prison. But I think the wartime kicked the degree up of one. It says 700 protesters gathered outside the American consulate in Toronto. Protesters increased dramatically when a parade of 2,000 protesters demonstrated and marched on the American consulate, where speakers riled the crowd and called Americans warmongers in India. Calcutta. It says, and then Ambassador Dillon admitted that the embassy received more than 2,000 petitions, with the grand total of 12,000 from the State Department in France. So we have lots and lots of support in France. We have support in Canada. We have support in India. It says, when democracy's enemies have been judged guilty of a crime as horrible as the Rosenbergs were convicted, when the legal process of democracy has been marshaled to their maximum strength to protect the lives of convicted spies, when in their most solemn judgment the tribunals of the United States have judged them guilty and the sentence, I will not intervene in this matter. That was the president's statement. So I'm not gonna dip my hands in this if the judges truly say you were a guilty person. It says the prison warden, presumably in consultation with the FBI, chose instead to move up the time of the executions to the evening shortly before the sunset because of Sabbath. They didn't want to execute these people on Sabbath. They were American Jews, and as such, they thought it would be not only bad PR but a terrible thing to do. It says protesters continued and picketed outside the White House, but the majority of Americans were powerfully and broadly supporting of the decision to go ahead with the execution. So Americans had been very supportive now of the executions, and it was going to move forward. The last statement that was given by the Rosenbergs was given by Ethel, and it said, "You did everything that you could be done. We are the first victims of American fascism." So we start to see the "you are a fascist" kind of statement being thrown around. And I don't want me to say that at a death sentence, but man, come on, like, we're of American fascism. You could just said, well, of American government, right? I mean, that would have worked too, but you see this one being clearly directed at a kind of sort of weird angle. It says Julius obeyed the sign above the chamber door. Silence, and never said a word. Bob Constantine, one of the 3 wire service correspondents chosen to record the grim spectacle, observed that there were not much life left in him. When 35-year-old Julius entered the room, the New York Times reported that both Rosenbergs went to their deaths with a composure that astonished the witnesses. After being secured with 5 leather straps, the first shock of 2,000 volts with 10 amperes surged through him at 8:04 p.m. His body temperature spiked to 130 degrees, and a strand of smoke rose from the leather face mask. As author Sam Roberts explains, the mask is not worn as a convenience to the condemned, but as a palliative for the witnesses. It prevents the eyes from popping out of the head. After 2 more jolts, the doctor pronounced Julius dead at 8:06. So we have both Ethel and Julius executed, and this is about halfway through the book. It goes on quite some time, and like I said, it's pretty good book. It breaks it down and gives it to you in kind of a dramatic sense, kind of like Dead Wake. I haven't even reviewed that, I don't believe, but I'm going to soon because it's a good book. But one of the things I don't really like is that it kind of softens the tone for people about who the Rosenbergs were and what they did. The Rosenbergs were basically modern day terrorists. They provided information on the nuclear bomb to our enemy, the Soviets, which then proliferated other information such as the nuclear bomb and time fuses and other aircraft components to our enemies, such as in Korea and Vietnam when we were in war there. I think this is a good book to read for anyone just because of the background context and the information. It does sensationalize it to an extent, but it's a good read. Like I said, I'd give it like a 6 out of 10 or something. Like, there's books on here I've read that are 10 out of 10 or something, but it's a good book. Get out there, revisit some history. This is kind of more of a pessimistic one. I'm kind of ending on like a kind of a salty note, but I encourage you to go out and look up the Rosenbergs yourself and try and understand who they were. Look up Venona, the Venona Project. Look up the Venona Decrypts. If you can, go buy the copy, man. I have a copy myself. It's a beautiful text compiled by the NSA and the FBI. It has the actual transcripts of people and translations of names and code names of people who we think who we know were involved in Soviet espionage against the United States. Again, this is just another book in our collection of texts for revisiting history. If you haven't already, please check out our website. We're going to have the archive. We're going to have all kinds of merchandise. We're going to have signed stuff from the actual episodes we do. Some sort of giveaway we'll have shortly that will involve merchandise, as well as a big startup that we're going to do for merchandise as well. So we're going to try and get some big merchandise moving. If you guys want to support the movement, Revisiting History, Liberty Front, any of the movements above, We support a lot of movements that are local. Right now, we're trying to get Arizona back open and move in. And we've been actually personally committed to greasing those wheels and putting some cheddar on those wheels and making them roll for the local economy. So if you can help us support the local economy and get history back open, and so we can all get out there and revisit history again, because it's a downtime right now. But like I said, I want you to get out there and educate yourself about the Rosenbergs, Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, Executing the Rosenbergs. That's the book we read today, and there will be a lot more books about this topic because I do have a couple texts on it, but I'm gonna try and space them out, that way I don't kind of beat this horse to death. But I did want to get one of these in because I've been itching. So thank you for watching, and revisit some history. Thank you. Have a good day.